moment when you snap at someone that you love because they're simply not being careful enough, and then you feel guilty 2 seconds later, right? I'm willing to bet that that is not a character flaw. You're not a horrible person. It's vicarious trauma. That protective, reactive edge outside of work is one of my biggest red flags that I am not wringing out my vicarious trauma sponge enough, which means regularly and or on a daily basis. And I'm telling you that about myself because it's normal. This is a normal thing for us as trauma therapists. And we do not give ourselves permission to be human in this work for it to be normal, okay? And before we get into the 11 signs vicarious trauma is showing up, which is why you're here, tell me, what's your version of this? Where do you notice it first? Is it your body, your mood, your sleep, or how you show up at home? Drop it in the comments, okay? See that you are not alone in this. It is a normal thing. And if we haven't met yet, hi, I'm Jenny Hughes. I'm a trauma psychologist and the founder of the Brave Trauma Therapist Collective, where we make sure that trauma therapists have something left in the tank at the end of the day. Before we get into the 11 signs of vicarious trauma, we got to talk about the difference between vicarious trauma and burnout. So here's the simplest way that I like to think about it. Burnout is often a structural problem. Too many clients, too little control, too much admin, not enough support, not enough recovery. Vicarious trauma is an exposure problem. Your nervous system and your worldview naturally get shaped by what you hear every single day. And yes, you can have both at the same time. A lot of trauma therapists do because all trauma therapists, and frankly, all helping professionals, are experiencing vicarious trauma in their job. It's not if or when, it is happening right now. Because vicarious trauma is experienced through empathic engagement, the foundation of your job description. But burnout doesn't have to happen, although it is incredibly common. And many of us will go in and out of burnout. It's usually not a one and done thing. And today we are going to focus on these 11 signs of vicarious trauma because if you can spot vicarious trauma as it's happening or as early as possible, you can help to prevent burnout in the future. So as you're listening to these signs, I want you to keep asking yourself one question. Is this structural depletion or is this exposure impact? Because the move there is different. Burnout asks for structural change. Vicarious trauma asks for processing, support, and meaning making around what you're holding. All right, let's get into the signs. I like to group these into buckets, if you will, because vicarious trauma likes to show up across contexts and domains in our lives. And these buckets are not any kind of order. They're just categories, okay? Your own early warning signs might live in any one of them. So, bucket number 1 are the nervous system on-duty signals. These are body and safety system signals that your vicarious trauma sponge is starting to get too full. You haven't wrung it out. Number 1, you're replaying sessions at night. Yep, you're done for the day, but your brain is still turning it over and over and over, like it's trying to change the outcome or prevent something bad from happening. And that's not going on because you're being dramatic or care too deeply. It's a sign of exposure residue that you haven't had a chance to wring out that vicarious trauma sponge at the end of the day or on a regular basis. Sign 2, hypervigilance about client safety. This is when you are checking your phone, right? You're running different scenarios or pre-planning crisis responses, all while you're just trying to live your life. This nervous system adaptation is trying to take over a world that is so outside of your control. And that's really tough as a trauma therapist. You just want your clients to be okay. But just as we work with them to find more flexibility in their hope for control, we have to do that with and for ourselves too. Sign 3, you feel reactive outside of this work. This is the one I named at the top. You're sharp and controlling, not because you're mean, but because part of you is still tracking threat. The fight part of your survival response is primed and it's coming out. And this is important because we often forget that just hearing our clients' trauma stories activates our own subcortical brains and survival instincts. Check out my hand model of the brain video if you don't know what I'm doing right here. Now, our midbrain and our brainstem can't tell what the words and images we're receiving aren't actually our own experience. So it goes into the fight, flight, freeze, flop, and fawn response naturally, not because you're not strong enough or not cut out for it, but because these parts of our brain do not have the smart cognitive part to say, hey, that's not actually happening to us. And then you're pissed off when you get home. Sign number 4, your startle response is higher and your body is jumpier, right? So this is when everyday input feels like too much. This is overstimulation to the max. You're startling easier. Noises feel so fucking loud. Your body's tense. You notice that you're bracing without realizing it. This is those tight shoulders, that jaw clenching I was already doing, holding your breath or just feeling keyed up when nothing's even happening. And again, not a personal failing. This is your nervous system staying in threat detection mode because it's been swimming in threat content all freaking day. Your system's doing exactly what it's designed to do. Scan, brace, prepare. The problem is it doesn't automatically shut off at 5 p.m., okay? All right, quick burnout versus vicarious trauma check-in before we move on. I want you to ask yourself these 2 questions. 1, if my workload, like your notes, admin stuff, if it stayed the same, but my client content got lighter for just 2 weeks, would all these signs or symptoms drop noticeably? If yes, then that's probably pointing to all of that being caused by vicarious trauma or this exposure residue that we're talking about. If no, hang on for the next question. 2, if my client content stayed the same, but my workload dropped by, let's just say 30%, and I had real recovery built in, would these signs and symptoms drop noticeably? If yes, that points to burnout and structural depletion. If no, it could probably be both, or you're in a level of nervous system activation that needs more support than just rest. It needs more than bubble baths and chocolate. Either way, though, you're not making it up, and your response tells you what kind of help will actually work. All right, time for bucket number 2. These are our in-session shifts. These are signs that show up in the room with your clients, not because you're doing therapy wrong, okay? But because your system is adapting to repeated exposure and trying to keep you functional. So let's start with sign 5 of 11 here. Emotional numbness in session. This is when you're with a client and you notice yourself going a little flat. You're still listening, sort of, still kind of tracking, still there, but you don't feel it, right? It's not in your body. And this isn't you being cold or detached. It's often your nervous system putting a buffer in place so that you can stay present enough without getting flooded. Sometimes numbness is a form of protection for our clients and for us too. It's your brain's way of saying, we're going to keep doing the work, but we're going to turn the volume down a little bit right now. And please don't judge yourself when this happens, because it happens to all of us. Just take it as a data point as you start to integrate some of our what to do steps that we'll have later in this video. Sign number 6, you're tired in a different way than overworked. Yes, you can be tired because you had too many sessions, right? But this is a different kind of tired. It is bone tired. It's tired where rest helps your body, maybe, but you still feel internally heavy and just done. It can feel like your empathy muscles are sore, like you're carrying something that doesn't fully come off at the end of the day. And that's often a sign that it's not just workload, it's exposure. Your system has been digesting trauma content all day long, and it needs more than sleep. It needs and deserves processing and release, which we will get to soon, I promise. Number 7, avoiding certain client populations. This is when you notice that dread around a certain presentation, or you feel yourself hoping that a referral doesn't get scheduled or doesn't follow through, or you're relieved when someone cancels. And listen when I say this, okay? This doesn't mean that you're not cut out for the work. It usually means that your capacity is giving you feedback. Avoidance is one of the most normal nervous system strategies that we have as human beings. If your system associates something with threat or overwhelm, it'll try to steer you away from it. And in trauma therapy, as trauma therapists, that can show up as, I can't take one more of that right now. Okay. All right. Time for another check-in, burnout versus vicarious trauma for bucket 2. So for this bucket, if the main feeling is, I can't do one more task, one more note, one more demand, that's going to be leaning more burnout. If the main feeling is, this content is sticking to me, it's changing me, it's making it harder to stay open, that's leaning vicarious trauma. And again, yes, it of course can be both, right? And these questions are helping you name which lever matters the most in this moment. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Bucket 3. This is where we're talking about meaning, worldview, and identity shifts as a result of this work. These are the signs that show up in how you see the world and how you see yourself. This is often where vicarious trauma gets mislabeled as, I'm just not myself lately. So let's dive into it with number 8. Your worldview feels heavier or darker. This is when you start expecting harm more quickly or all the time. You notice yourself scanning for what could go wrong. Trust feels harder, and none of that means that you're pessimistic, but it does mean that you've had a lot of repeated exposure to how bad things can get. You can't unknow all the things you know as a trauma therapist, and your brain is trying to update its model of the world because that's what brains do. They learn from what they take in, and trauma therapists take in a lot. Number 9 is where cynicism increases, but compassion's still there. And this one is really specific, okay? Because it's when you still care deeply about clients. You can still feel tenderness. And at the same time, you are so much more cynical about systems, people, institutions, or the way the world works. And that combination of the compassion and cynicism is a clue because it often means, or literally means, your compassion is still intact. That's a good thing. But your meaning system is getting strained. And cynicism can be protective, right? We are working within so many broken systems. And so your brain is trying to create distance from how freaking disappointing that is or how helpless you feel about it. Sign number 10. This is where you feel alone even when you're surrounded by others. So maybe you work in a group practice or you have a consultation group and you do have colleagues around you, maybe even a decent team, but you still feel alone and isolated. This often happens because you're talking logistics and treatment plans and meetings, but no one is naming the emotional cost. Nobody is saying, this is what it does to me. And that loneliness is a major risk factor. Vicarious trauma doesn't just live in the content of our sessions. It also lives in the silence between us as colleagues. When you can't metabolize the impact with other humans who get it, it sticks more. Sign 11, last one. This is a big one. It's when you question if you should leave the field. This is when you start thinking, maybe I can't do this, or I don't know if I can keep doing this forever. And I'm not here to argue with that or to shame it in any way. I'm here to treat it like data. Sometimes it's the burnout data. The structure is unsustainable. And sometimes it's vicarious trauma data. You've been absorbing too much without enough support to process it. Either way, that thought usually means something needs to change. With that, let's do our final burnout versus vicarious trauma check-in. 3. So with this question about leaving the field, if leaving the field feels like I can't live like this schedule and pressure anymore, that's going to be leaning burnout. If it feels like I can't keep carrying what I'm hearing and holding, that leans vicarious trauma. And if it's both, that's not a failure. Oh, we've said that before, right? And I mean it. It's a signal that you need and deserve structural support and exposure support. Okay. Quick recap, because we have gone over a lot of information in this video. If you were nodding hardest in the workload direction, that's going to be your burnout lever. That's structural depletion. That's your tank running low. If you were nodding hardest in the replaying, scanning, bracing, worldview shifting direction, that's your vicarious trauma lever. That's exposure impact. That's your sponge getting saturated. It's not getting wrung out. And if you were like most trauma therapists and you're thinking, both? That makes sense. When vicarious trauma goes unnamed, we push through and burnout gets more likely. So, what actually helps, you ask? Oh, I'm so glad you're curious. This is where my BRAVE method comes in, and it is super simple on purpose. It works whether what you're dealing with is burnout, vicarious trauma, or the very common combination of both. First, you have to name it. Name what you are experiencing, even if your first pass is messy. This might be vicarious trauma. This might be burnout. It might be both. Because naming turns shame into information. It takes all the power out of the vicarious trauma and or burnout, and it helps you stop using the wrong tool for the wrong problem. Next, you tame it, which is where we calm the system and choose the right lever. If this is burnout, we tame it with structural support. We need to change our workload, our boundaries, our schedule. We need to look at our admin time and demands and look at real recovery to the best of your ability, of course. And if this is vicarious trauma, we tame it by wringing out the sponge, processing what you've absorbed, getting it witnessed by colleagues who get it, getting language for it, and doing all that hopefully in community. And either way, I want you to start with whatever already works for you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel when you're already depleted. Taming it means doing what you know is going to help your brain and body. And from there, you can then build and layer or add in other things. Last thing we do is we reframe vicarious trauma so that we can access vicarious resilience. And this isn't some toxic positivity thing. It's about meaning making in a new way, because vicarious trauma can hit your worldview hard. And we also need a frame that includes what else is true, that you are also exposed to humans who are incredibly strong. They are surviving, repairing. They're so courageous, and that you get to see people change and get better. That is vicarious resilience. And it can truly become a renewable energy source in this work once you know how to identify and work with it. And I have a whole full video on vicarious resilience. We're going to link it here and in the description below in case you don't know what it is yet. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, okay, Jenny, I can see myself in this, but I just don't know what my pattern is. That's why I made my free vicarious trauma tracker. It gives you a really concrete way to name vicarious trauma and track it across the week so that you can catch your red flags earlier and get more clear on what actually helps you tame it. You can grab that, and it includes a free bonus mini course, a video course where I walk you through every single section at the link below in the description, or just go to braveproviders.com/VT tracker. Okay. And if any of these signs hit you, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not broken. You're having a human response to intense and incredible work, and you deserve support for the cost of caring. So, now that we've gone through this, pick one sign that stood out or felt familiar. Name it, write it down, maybe track it this week. And if you feel so inclined, tell me in the comments, where do you notice vicarious trauma or burnout first? In your body, your mood, sleep, home, something else? Share it below, and you'll see that you're not alone.